My name's Jim. Some people seem to want to call me Lord Knight, but as far as we're concerned, I'm Jim. I'm on my fourth career. You know, I had a briefish career as an arts centre promoter and actor and all of that stuff. And then, whilst waiting to be a politician, I spent 10 years selling telephone directory advertising, so I've got that sales background, perfect preparation to then be a professional politician, which I did for 9 years as an MP, 5 years as a minister, 3 years of those as a schools minister. And then since I got, you know, electoral gravity caught up in 2010 and I got the golden parachute into the Lords, I then have started to move back into education, and I'm now the Chief Education Advisor at the TES, and you can give me any feedback you want about the TES over lunch. But one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is the future and the extent to which we have a school system that is adequately preparing people for a very uncertain future. So I've been reading Paul Mason's book about post-capitalism, you know, how fragile is capitalism? It's not necessarily permanent. That's been interesting me. I'm reading a wonderful book by a woman called Robin Chase, who founded Zipcar in the States, about the sharing economy called Peers Inc., and trying to understand how that different economic model to capitalism potentially works alongside it. I'm thinking about driverless cars, about Obama starting the process of doing some initial funding into brain implants to help our mental health. That's also a bit scary. Artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things. I got a new car at the weekend and I've now got an app for my car so that I can get it warmed up on a frosty day from the breakfast table. And all I know is it's really uncertain. That's the cliche is the only thing we know about the future is that we don't know what's going to happen. And yet we do know some things with reasonable certainty. So we know that the children starting out in school this last September, it's a fair chance they'll live to 100. And what does that mean? What does that mean when we have a whole social model built around the notion that, you know, you work hard at school, some of you go on to university, and if you really apply yourself, you'll join the professions, you'll get a final salary pension, you'll be able to get a nice house that you can then leave to your kids, but you'll own, once you retire at 60, 65, then you'll live only about 10 years, and we can just about afford that in terms of your care needs. And obviously that is all over as a model. And so the life expectancy issues, the hollowing out of the labour market, I'm on my fourth career, that's just very normal. The proportion of people who are going to be self-employed, currently there are 50% of the workforce who are not in a position to make any provision for their pension. Graduate debt is increasing, and yet we also have an increase in the number of graduates doing non-graduate jobs. There's all sorts of things that we know now which give us some certainty about the uncertainty. And those are all the things that we're going to explore today. And in order to just kick us off, I hope some of you might have downloaded the polling app that we asked you to, the Poll Everywhere. If you haven't, it's not the end of the world, because you can use your smartphone. I'm assuming that most people here have such a beast, and you can put in a URL instead. But I'd like to do the first live poll, which is this one here, and just test the temperature for you. I want you to put in the word that summarizes what you think schools are for. So if you go on the app and say you're participating, it should take you straight to that. If not, you can put in the URL pollev.com/wholeed, and that will take you to that poll, and just put in a word that summarises what you think schooling is for. Good, we've got at least one response. It's very helpful, thank you for that person. Good, okay. I've only so far got 13 responses, so I think you can try out the 14. Oh, we're getting there. I'll let that one run for a little bit, and I can check back in on that. But it's starting to take shape, and kind of obviously schooling is about learning, but we're starting to see some of the other words that we'll be talking about today about obviously life and adulthood, and it's moving so fast it's a struggle for me to keep up with it now, because you're starting to contribute. This is good.
Thanks for the warm welcome. The rumours are true. My name's George the Poet. I just to give a little context as to what I do. I perform poetry about what I see in society. I occasionally I put it to music quite a lot, and the reason for this is pretty much that I always felt as though when I started out as a rapper, some of what I was trying to discuss was kind of lost in translation, and that was a shame because the audience that I was initially speaking to was kind of my social group. See, the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu says all reality is a construct. So we exist in relation to our social ties. That means you'll never understand me without looking at where I'm from and some of the local guys. I'm the exception to the rule. I was the only one in year 6 to get into a school that at the time wasn't already under a warning, since Ofsted declared it was underperforming. So you can imagine the wonder and awe when little George's post finally comes in the morning. They're screaming and shouting and thunderous bawling at my letter of acceptance to the school. I'm the exception to the rule. The problem is that's not what I wanted. It's not like I felt scared to be there, but it was far from home in more ways than one, and all my friends were elsewhere, to be fair. That was my first real lesson and opportunity. Save yourself or get left in a lost community. Even though I saw myself in my friends, if I stayed there, I couldn't be much help for my ends. You see, all reality is a construct. We exist in relation to other guys and girls. So I had to move to a better reality from one where everybody tries and fails. I can't say I live to regret the decision, given that some of them are now dead and in prison, after growing up too fast from a young age, having to supplement their mum's wage, leaving school early to make easy money because in their eyes education doesn't amount to much, getting into trouble, coming out of trouble, but the world's moved on. Now they're out of touch. Just as serious as everyone else, without as much experience as everyone else. And anyway, what sort of vocation is eager for people that reports a probation? In a job market hampered by fear, aggression, and a severe recession, the absolute dream is a clear profession, with even the slightest prospect of career progression. So here's the question. Who deserves a job? A benefits recipient labeled a worthless slob, or worse, a yob. Society treats the hard to reach like a single subversive mob, but everyone brings something to the table. There's no point putting them in a flat and giving them cable when there's work to be done and they're ready, willing and able. Imagine watching your life being sucked away and then waking up to a structured day, coming home to a structured night, building your life on a construction site. You see, all reality is a construct. We exist in relation to our social ties. So no matter what you see around you, the real world happens when you close your eyes. You don't have to compromise yourself for your salary. You don't have to jeopardize your health or your sanity. You have the right to be a blessing, not a burden. Find purpose in service. Be a help for your family. If we forget how outcast the voice of an outcast is, they'll never be heard. Their words are just noises without answers. You see, the fact is, there are no choices without chances. So in practice, choice is about chances. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, on the subject of where I'm from, recently it occurred to me that a good measure of the kind of progress of the actual geographic location where I grew up would be for me to Google it and see what came up. Because I felt like I talk about the negatives too much, and there must be some public positives to celebrate. And in fact, I'm not going to tell you what came up, but it wasn't the best picture. And what kind of surprised me was it focused a lot on the crime and the delinquency of the area, but I don't see any young people there anymore. A lot of them got ASBOs, a lot of their families were moved out of the area, and like I said, a lot of them are now in prison or no longer with us. And this kind of is a big incentive for me to have a presence in education, not only speak to the issues that plague many people from my community, but also kind of stand as a kind of demonstration as to the potential for bringing one's talents to the education space. I was fortunate enough to graduate from King's College, Cambridge 2 years ago. Shortly after that, I got my record deal, and I now do this professionally. But incorporating educational messaging is of great importance to me, because it's all about knowledge. See, knowledge is a journal of insight. Knowledge is a record of discovery. You may have had no knowledge of me prior to this moment, but I existed before you discovered me. Knowledge is information on which we step to get higher. But what about that which we have yet to acquire? The bits you forget, the bits you neglect. Imagine all the knowledge that slips through the net. Pearls of wisdom that haven't been given that polish. Understanding you can't access at college. Simply because it hasn't been accredited according to academia. It's not knowledge until it's acknowledged. I believe we have a duty to act on it, to analyze life and to extricate fact from it. See, when we take from the world, we don't have to subtract from it. Using what we extract from it, we can impact on it. You see, all existence is contribution. Let's ignore the twists and convolutions. There's 7 billion people in the world, and not one of them has the same fingerprint as you. Everyone brings something to the table, but not everyone gets a seat. And when people don't get a seat, then people don't get to eat. But that's only half of the tragedy. The other half is equally sad to see. Remember that knowledge I was talking about, the one protected by illusion? Well, those same people are walking about with that uncollected contribution. Hidden wisdom, unlocked ability, unsung possibility. We live in a world that celebrates our young for being more professional than clever, which is kind of ironic because we're living in a time where knowledge is more accessible than ever. Time and place have passed the physical stage. We now live in the digital age, and we have much more to contribute than unfulfilling jobs for minimal wage. We want self-determination. Through self-determination, we can help to serve the nation. It's not just about success, it's about discovery. Growth means more than economic recovery. Growth is more than earning some paper. Growth is exploring and learning from failure. And what better teacher than enterprise? The arena in which ideas centralize and we truly find out where the potential lies. It's been a technological world for a long time, but we're the generation that came of age online. So there's no way we could all be amateurs. We form our thoughts in 140 characters. We share jokes through GIFs and memes and we found a brand new home for myths and dreams. Progress occurs by many different means, but we owe it to ourselves to listen. I'm not just the guy that sells the vision. I hope I'm testament to the fact that with a little help and wisdom, young people can be self-sufficient. You see, knowledge is information on which we step to get higher into rarefied atmospheres with thin air. So what about that which we have yet to acquire? It's not just out there, it's in here. That's all Existence's contribution from my search party. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, George, as ever, brilliant. And for that last poem, All Existence's contribution, there's a video which in part was made with Shylands, I believe. That's probably available on YouTube.
It is available.
And there is a YouTube of construction of the first poem too. In that first poem, George, you talked about, it sort of opens with you getting the letter and the school. Mm-hmm. So you, just for everyone's context, just say a little bit about your background and your journey from Brent to Barnet to Cambridge.
Okay, my parents came to the country in the 80s from Uganda. We settled in Brent in northwest London. I grew up in an estate called St. Raphael's Estate in the Harsden, Neasden area. From the estate, I was fortunate enough to get a place in the grammar school, Queen Elizabeth Boys, Barnet. From QE, I went on to Cambridge, and I graduated 2 years ago, I've said already.
And you then talked about going back to Brent, to Harsden.
That's right.
Are you in touch with anyone that you were at primary school with?
Yeah, I am, a lot of them. And it's kind of strange to see how predictably a lot of people's lives have played out. And I hope I don't sound condescending or patronizing or disrespectful in that sense, but I have conversations with my old school friends about how predictable it's all turned out. And I feel like that's something that can be avoided for future generations.
And this summer you've been doing some work around sort of giving some immersion in some possible careers for people through the Institute of Education, is that right?
That's right. Okay, so I set up a project called the Search Party Project, which is aimed at introducing young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to the world of enterprise. Simply because I believe that enterprise is a pretty good teacher of context, to contextualize a lot of what is being learned, and to think about the future of many of the industries around them that are, active in their communities. My estate was just next to the Diageo building and Wembley Stadium, but it was very far from my reality growing up. So I feel establishing that connection early in life is very important.
Cool. And then finally, because we just don't have enough time for anything today, you're also interested in history.
I'm very interested in history. I've started a project to teach history GCSE through poetry, kind of condensing a lot of the stories in a kind of bite-sized formats to assist with both studying, learning the content, and revising in exam season. I think the teaching of history is very important, and it is instrumental in forming kind of socially engaged young people.
And at TES we're working with the British Museum on a huge history lesson, and there's a lovely stimulus video that George features in with an extraordinary, a clip from an extraordinary poem about inspired by Benin bronze. And I think next week the museum is going to launch the whole poem as a video. So that if you search huge history lesson, you can find that, and it's beautiful. George, thank you very much. Are you staying all morning?
Yeah.
All day or whatever? So people can come and talk to you?
Please do.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Jim. Is this working? And thanks for the invitation to speak on Friday the 13th. What could possibly go wrong? And I may need a clicker if I'm going to show anything, or I could not show anything.
I'll furnish you with
but if there is one of those. And yeah, I'm Jeff, the not poet, and I'm going to give you some very anti-poetical, almost non-poetic content today. My day job is at Nesta, which straddles a lot of fields, health, arts, and so on. We do quite a bit now in education, research, experiments with schools, and if you're interested, next week we're putting out a conclusion of a lot of experiments on flipped learning, what actually works in flipped learning in schools, and we invest in quite a lot of ed tech firms being used by thousands actually of schools across the UK. But I'm not going to talk about any of that at all. I'm going to try and pick up on what Andrea Schleicher was talking about with that rather depressing music in the background. I'm never sure why these things always have that kind of depressing piano music with them. And I'm going to talk about really how we help children to be makers, not observers of the world, and why I think that is a central sort of challenge for this community. And I thought I'd do that through asking 3 questions of any new ideas which you're talking about. And this actually came up from a session did exactly this time last week in Mumbai. At Nesta, we now work a lot around the world, in China, India, Latin America. And I was with a group of head teachers and educators in Mumbai. Amazingly, the name Pierre Bourdieu was mentioned in that meeting, just as George the poet did. And two mentions within a week must mean something, or maybe not. So, first question, is any idea fit for the future? So here is a dense slide. Some of you may have seen this before. Have any of you seen this sort of analysis before? This is the analysis of which jobs are likely to disappear in the next 20 years in the US and the UK. About half of all jobs in the US, probably about a third of jobs in the UK will be, or highly likely to be, replaced by automation or robots. And they're not just kind of obvious ones like semi-skilled labour in supermarkets. There are also less obvious ones like economists. Half of the economists will lose their jobs perhaps. Lawyers, software programmers, perhaps surprisingly. Recreational therapy is undoubtedly the most reliable job for any child to train for. Massage and so on. And what's really interesting about this analysis is the characteristics of jobs most likely to survive are ones with a lot of creativity, ones with a lot of social and emotional intelligence, and ones involving dexterity. A robot cannot tie your shoelaces yet, and probably won't be able to in 20 years' time. Incidentally, if you know anyone becoming an Uber driver, Uber just arrived last week in where I live in Luton. All Uber driving jobs will almost certainly be gone probably in 10 years, and Uber is investing very heavily in driverless cars and will sack all the people they're now recruiting. Now, you would expect every education system in the world to be responding to this analysis and emphasising creativity, social intelligence, problem solving in their curriculum and their reforms. Amazingly, this isn't happening at all. And indeed, the drift of policy in primary, secondary and tertiary education is still almost opposite to the message of what we can fairly confidently know about the future. The OECD has begun to think about adding into PISA, collaborative learning, problem solving. This will start becoming part of the PISA process, but most national governments are not even aware this is happening, let alone reflecting it in the design of curriculum. So question 1, for any idea, is it really preparing young people for the likely world of life and work 10, 20, let alone 50 years' time? Second question, of any idea, does it work? A week ago in Mumbai, we were talking about the hole in the wall education. You may know that project. Very dubious whether that actually had the results which were claimed in fantastic TED Talks. Here's another example you may know, Scared Straight, a program in the US which got former criminals to go into schools, to terrify kids, to stop them becoming criminals, drug addicts and so on. Hundreds of millions of foundation money went into spreading Scared Straight. It has its own TV series which is still live. Here is what happened when they actually analysed the effect of Scared Straight on children. Some of you have learnt a bit of statistics. Yes, it increases crime, it doesn't reduce crime. And the point is there are many very plausible ideas in education which you can do fantastic talks about, which simply don't work or even have the opposite effect that is intended. So I think evidence is really important. We host at Nesta a thing called the Alliance for Useful Evidence, which brings together now thousands of researchers, institutions and users of evidence. And I'm actually a fan of things like the EEF, trying to distill the available knowledge of the world to help head teachers make decisions. One of our problems is we still have much less evidence in the sort of non-cognitive skills, team working, resilience, problem-solving stuff that I'm most interested in, but I still think we need to test all of our ideas against hard evidence. We've done that a bit on technology and shown how much of the uses of digital tech in schools haven't really worked, didn't meet their promise, and were set up in ways which were almost bound to fail. And at the moment we're trying to create a pool of several hundred schools to act as test beds for tech, so then if you are a teacher you can find out what you should buy and what you shouldn't buy. I'll jump over that. Final little point on evidence. This is something which we're just launching at the moment, actually called Skills Route, which I think is a pointer to the future. This came out of an open data challenge we ran using data from the National Pupil Database, and a lot of teams found ways to combine school level data with other data sets to provide really useful information. This one linked school level data with labour market outcomes, and you won't be able to see this, but it shows if you choose these kind of courses at 16, this is what you might expect to earn, this is the sort of job you might be able to get, even this is the kind of happiness you might expect in this career. This is very much a first cut. Nowhere else in the world has anything like this, but I think the landscape of the next 10 or 20 years will be shaped by all sorts of tools like this, which give pupils much more knowledge about the implications of their choices, and indeed about how good their school is. There'll be a lot less passive, perhaps an uninformed consumers than in the past. But the key thing I wanted to talk about was agency. To me, really the biggest question of any educational idea is, does it leave behind children able to shape the world, to shape their lives, to make things, and not just to be passive observers? How many people in this room have visited a studio school? About 1 in 20. So a few people here have been working on studio schools for 10 years. In a way, that was one attempt at an answer to this question, responding to employers who said school leavers just weren't ready for work, teenagers who said school was boring, and they tried to get out. We now have nearly 50 studio schools here in the UK, a few beginning to open in other countries. And their model really is absolutely aligned with the whole education approach. But for those of you who don't know about it, most of the curriculum at a studio school is done through real-life practical projects, working often with employers, solving a real problem in the real world, and learning the maths, the science, the English, and so on through working on those problems rather than through classic pedagogy. These are some pictures from the one in Liverpool, which is linked into the computing industry and games. The pupils are paid for their work, which is quite motivating for 15 and 16-year-olds. We had an event a few weeks ago, the most extraordinary presentations from students of the companies they've set up, the products they've set up. And in a way, it's trying to tap into sort of motivation in a way classic schooling models don't. Every pupil has a personal coach who helps to personalize learning. And in a way, I think the studio schools are a complement to whole education, because we deliberately did these as brand new schools because we feared existing schools would be too conservative to actually adapt radical new models. I hope the people in this room are the counter-proof, but have a look at every element of studio schools and think which ones could you adapt or adopt. Because I think we've got some really good examples now, a lot of evidence, and a huge amount of creativity. This is the curriculum framework. It's not geography, maths, and so on. It's things like communication, relationships, enterprise, problem solving, emotional intelligence. It's a completely different way of thinking about curriculum, putting at the core the things Andrea Schleicher was talking about, rather than having those, as it were, on the periphery of the curriculum. This is the one which I sort of like best because it's kind of aspirational, the Space Studio in Banbury. You probably didn't think Banbury was, where, people took off into sci-fi worlds. Each of the schools has a link to an industry and tries not to prepare young people in a vocational way, but to use the issues, in this case, of satellites and space as a way to learn about science, maths, etc. And above all, a sense of aspiration. We've developed a whole array of assessment tools, very different from the OECD ones. And the crucial point, and I think this is the really original thing which the team have done, is assessing things like creativity, teamwork, resilience, through self-assessment, peer assessment, coach assessment, and employer assessment. So you get a 360-degree picture of how the pupil is progressing on the things which really matter, not the traditional metrics which are often of things which don't really matter at all. Some of you will have been involved over the last few years in all the work on digital making. Jim certainly was, and it's been a big thing for Nesta in the last few years, trying to get computer science in the curriculum, funding things like code clubs and Coder Dojo, make things do stuff, and now this year getting the BBC to put its weight behind helping young people learn how to code, to program, to make apps, websites, all that sort of stuff. For me, the key in this is not actually learning coding, which probably isn't all that useful for all that many people, and as I showed earlier, some of the coding jobs may well disappear. It's more about how you see a digital transformation which is happening in every part of your life and feel agency on it, that you can shape digital things and not just be a passive user of Facebook or Instagram and so on. And I think the UK in some ways is leading the world in how to do this at multiple levels. One final example is about happiness. Here's another very different kind of course we launched a few weeks ago. This is an organisation I helped set up, which is the Action for Happiness course launched by the Dalai Lama, no less, which has tried to distill in a simple 8-week course a set of very simple ideas about how to be happy, how to focus your attention and your life on the things which really matter. And some of this is beginning to happen in schools. Many of you are involved in that. I would love to see more teachers making use of this course as really a sort of normal part of certainly secondary education, and probably some of the elements work at primary education as well. But a final comment. Early this week was the centenary celebration of the life and work of Michael Young, who some of you, perhaps not the younger amongst you, will know, was the creator of things like the Open University and Which, and probably about 100 organisations he created of all kinds. And what was very clear about his approach to education, which above all said that as a society we massively underestimated the potential of almost everyone, core to, I think, his spirit and his ethos was again this idea of agency. How do you, through education, not fill people up with knowledge, not have exam factories, but leave people at 18 or 21 with the confidence and competence to shape the world around them, and an ethic of responsibility, a sense that actually you have a duty to use your knowledge and your skills to make the world a better place. It's a very, very simple idea, infused, let's say, a whole array of things he created, but it's amazing how often we forget that very simple idea and revert to a default of a kind of education which actually doesn't leave people any more able to shape the world around them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I noticed that I've just changed my picture. And second thing to say that we don't know each other, we've never met, and we did not plan our, what we're going to say together, because there's a huge amount of crossover between what I'm going to talk about today and what you've just heard. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak on day 2 of the conference. I've been asked to speak for a few minutes around the world of work, and then how I believe that education can help the youngsters translate and transition into that world of work. And in doing that, I'm acutely aware that I come from this, perhaps from your perspective, with a lack of experience and naivety about your world. And although I have very little experience from your perspective, I can absolutely see the challenges of the workforce from where I sit at work. My observations also come from a wider sense than just my role at work. But as a sort of citizen of the UK, and also as a parent, I'm completely passionate about education and the belief that every child should have a right to education and fulfilling their sense of purpose. Can everyone hear me okay? Because I can feel the mic. I'm getting slight shakes. Is the mic okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone can hear me? So, as the programme says, I work for John Lewis. Today we are a 4.5 billion turnover business with 30,000 partners, as we call them. If you widen that to the partnership, we are a 10 billion turnover business with 80,000 partners, employees. And we have a fundamental purpose that is deep-rooted in the sense of development and learning. And we talk around the happiness of the employees and the need to make sure that they fulfil their potential. And this purpose undoubtedly helps us have a very, very big focus on progression. And it leads to actions like last week where we launched a manifesto for change that concentrated on making sure we have better jobs, better performance and better pay. And I certainly feel inspired by being part of a leadership community that it has a deep sense of commitment to that purpose. We invest £17 million a year in training. Last year we offered 140 apprenticeships, and with more and more of those to come. We have recently opened a store in Birmingham and we offered 200 people pre-employment training. And that was to teach basic skills of reading and writing and how to prepare for an interview. So we take our role in communities very, very seriously and our role in learning very, very seriously. So does that all sound rosy? Because I think sometimes it might, and here comes that lovely warm, gushy feeling about the John Lewis brand. But for those in the retail industry, I suspect it doesn't feel quite so rosy. So we work in a sector that is transforming under our feet, and like most other industries, technology is playing a very, very disruptive role. So people are now shopping online. So hands up in this room, anyone who shops online. Marvellous. We love you, and at the same time, you are our curse. Because we have better sales, yes, of course we do. But it also means we have a new and expensive infrastructure that we have to allow and cost for. And that is a very, very difficult and deep transition for all retailers. So technology is not just changing people's shopping habits, but society too. And I'm sure we all share the same challenges about data, new forms of social media, data protection, etc., etc. We in John Lewis are also right in the split of that labour market that I know as you as a community are all well versed in. On one hand, we've got the rise of professional, highly skilled jobs, and the other, actually, we have a large part of our workforce that are relatively low-skilled, low-pay. And that, for us, presents a real cultural dilemma, because at the heart of our purpose is a sense of equality and democracy. And that tension is alive and well in our business right now. So, what are we looking for in terms of people in the future? So, on one hand, we're looking for a completely new set of skills. We're looking for what I call sort of social intelligence, and that's the bundle of emotional awareness, team empathy, problem-solving ability to influence across multiple boundaries, both not just different teams, but sometimes across the world. We need an increasing sense of creativity and design, and what I call a design mind, sort of how to think across problems. And if you're talking about lateral thinking, we see that at work. We get teams across functions working together. We absolutely get a better result. But it's hard to achieve. We're also increasingly required for all our staff to have analytical and critical thinking skills. And certainly I think education establishments are well placed to help with that one. All underpinned by an innate need to understand technology. Not just both from a technical understanding, but I think more from the opportunities that it's going to create both in the consumer and society world. So in terms of roles, what do we see in terms of future roles? We absolutely see IT roles increasing. We see anyone who works in the digital online space, across all of those, absolutely rising at the rate of knots. The talent is really hard to find. We see jobs springing up in relationship management. How do you actually manage across those borders? And relationship managers often help people do that. And I believe in time there'll also be a blend of traditional elements of things like marketing and HR, where we're talking around engagement and employee proposition. There's without doubt going to be further consolidation in parts of the work and transactional parts of the workforce. There's also going to be different types of roles emerge. So the one that I often think captures my imagination the most. So you think about today, a buyer goes and buys a product, and it goes to the merchandiser, and the merchandiser works out how many you need, and then it puts through the supply chain and goes onto the shelf. Buying a product in the new world is not going to be the same. Consumers are going to buy experiences. So we need to actually help the buying community transform their skills to sell consumer experiences, and that's a very, very different mindset than the old traditional buying role. All of this is underpinned by our need to actively make sure that we reduce and make efficient our infrastructure over time. So we will be constantly looking to roles where actually they no longer perform the value they used to have to the business. We will be actively looking to make sure we replace them with new roles that do. So quite a challenging time if you're in retail. What would I ask from education establishments? So that got me thinking, actually. And the first thing I say, I read something recently that said that schools and universities should be preparing pupils for the jobs that don't exist yet. Now, I thought about that, and I thought that's quite a tall order for everyone in the room. It feels like a tall order from where I sit, and I sort of feel I've got a great degree of insider knowledge about, roles certainly that may or may not exist in retail. So I think that's a particular challenge, and you also reacted to that when I said it. So I think that's a tough gig. But what I can see, the opportunity, is for education establishments, both from primary right through to universities, to be offering what I call bridges into the workforce. And what do I think some of those bridges might be? So a few ideas that came to mind when I was thinking about what to say. There's an opportunity to help the students think laterally. So how they actually apply the knowledge they've learned at school in practical situations. Creative problem solving, perhaps through collaboration in schools between students and teachers and parents. I'm not sure how many people do that. We also need to, I think, recognise and diagnose different learning styles. So work with the students to actually think about how best they learn and how best you can tailor their learning needs in the workplace. Perhaps doing things like action learning sets in core academic subjects. Life skills, this is a really big one. How to fail gracefully. How to learn to deal with setbacks. The obvious one I think we always talk about is career services, CV writing, role models in the workplace, partner up with local businesses for work experience, which I'm sure a lot of you already do. Have a curriculum time that teaches how to think. Do we actually teach people about thinking style actually in the workplace and get them to discuss their own preferences and differences? Create partnerships with strategic relationships with local businesses. And I guess the ask of you is be demanding on your local businesses. In my experience, a lot of businesses are looking for roles to play in community. So if you come out and ask for help, my sense is that will be people who will be willing to support you in your challenges. Embrace technology. Embrace it. We can't fight it. Digital, digital, digital. I really understand the tension as a parent and at work. That comes with all sorts of consequences. But I think in today's world, to actually think that we can do anything but embrace it possibly leads us to ignore also the future opportunities that it can bring. And my last request to everybody in this room is probably, and maybe you'll give me an idea of whether I'm right on this one, is to try and integrate these approaches. So my sense is, and I may be wrong, so I'm really happy for you to stand up and say you're completely wrong, is that often we see these things as add-ons. And I thought it was fascinating when you talk about completely flipping it and starting the curriculum with those core things that I've been talking about. My request is, could we please think about integrating these approaches? So my sense is that they are perceived and created as add-ons to core academic subjects. Now, I may be completely wrong in that, but my belief is that children can, and youngsters can feel that. So the question, the challenge is how to integrate these opportunities into a core sense of your purpose in schools. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of practical challenges, but I do believe if the youngsters can grow up thinking that there's a deep sense where we have a blend of both academic learning and more of these life skills, that they will indeed actually be able to progress in the way that we all wish they could. My last reflection is also that for many people, and for me and for all of us, I often believe the challenge is about how we see the world in relation to our norms, and how we grew up, and how we perceive things, and how ready we are for the modern world. And I have a simple belief that I've been trying to practice myself recently, which is whenever I get stuck in something, I normally go and ask one of my kids, or I normally go and ask one of the young workers who work, particularly in the online team in Diagnose. They don't always give me the full answer, but they normally help me really unstick and remove some of the barriers that I quickly reflect on my own in terms of actually some of the challenges I'm facing. So I guess the question to everyone in this room is maybe we should have a few students at something like this next year. I will leave that with you. Thank you very much indeed for your time.